longer a hotel. For 60 years, the Hotel Orlando was a landmark in Decatur and was a well-known hotel in Decatur. It opened in 1916. It stood there on South Water Street in downtown Decatur, a place where governors came and even a movie star or two. How did Decatur get to have such a prominent hotel? Well, that goes back to the Powers family. You see, Orlando Powers, there he is, came to Decatur in 1849 on horseback. The city population was only 3,000 people then. Powers knew Abraham Lincoln. Before the corner of Water and Wood became what we know as the Hotel at Orlando, it was a church built in 1835. And next to the church was a stable where a thoroughbred horse named Imported Billet, owned by Samuel Powers, the brother of Orlando, was kept. And that horse was known all over the world because it won horse races across the United States. Also close to the church was the Western Union Telegraph Office, where bulletins were received during the Civil War. The back of the telegraph office was the office of a newspaper called the Republican, which was the first cylinder printing press in central Illinois. Orlando Powers was to amass over 7,000 acres of land in and around Macon County. His first business was a mill, but he had various other businesses as well. And then in 1889, he built the Powers Opera House on that block. There was a fire, but it was rebuilt. The Opera House was huge, and it seated about 2,000 people, if you can imagine an opera house that big. Orlando Powers lived on West Decatur Street, and that house still stands. If you're familiar with the Powers Mansion, and that is a picture of the Powers Mansion, that's not the house. Orlando Powers lived in the house just west of that house, just across the street. Orlando Powers passed away, and the money from his vast estate and the buildings and land that he owned generated enough cash that the Powers family decided to build the Hotel Orlando. And it was built in 1915, 1916. That's Jack Powers, that's Orlando's grandson. There had been an extensive fire in 1914, which led to the raising of the second opera house, and thereafter the building of the hotel. The general contractor was J.L. Simmons of Chicago. It was the first project by J.L. Simmons in the city of Decatur, but there were many others to follow. The large size of the hotel rooms and the bathrooms was noted by the newspaper and among those attending the grand opening. It is said that the Hotel Orlando was the best hotel in this part of the country. I'm quoting from the Herald and Review from February the 18th, 1916, the day after the hotel opened. A journalist who came from Chicago to write an article for the Chicago Tribune said that the Hotel Orlando may not be the biggest hotel in the Midwest, but it is a model of what a fine hotel should be. The main lobby and office were trimmed in black walnut with a green marble baseboard. All furniture downstairs was mahogany. The six upper floors were finished in mahogany as well. There were 3 hydraulic elevators to service the 200 rooms. There was a ballroom on the second floor. It was to be where large dinners, weddings, parties, dances, balls, and other social gatherings were held for the next 60 years. The comforts and luxury of the hotel were there for everyone to see. The opening of the hotel was quite an event. Over 400 telegrams were received from across the United States and abroad, stating their congratulations and well wishes, coming mainly from other hotels and their owners and staffs. There was a cake shaped like the hotel, which stood over 4 feet tall. And the evening of the first day was a charity ball held to raise money for the Decatur Memorial Hospital, and it was attended by nearly 400 people, and the dresses of 60 women who were at the charity ball were described the next day in the newspaper. It is stated in the Herald and Review on multiple occasions that the Hotel Orlando was the center of the social, cultural, and political activities for Decatur and Macon County. The Hotel Orlando was managed originally by the Van Oren Company, and for years the manager was Harry Van Orman. Harry had managed two major hotels in Chicago before this, and the Van Orens Company had managed 7 different hotels in the early days of the Hotel Orlando. The staff of the Hotel Orlando, when it was opened, was well selected from the ranks of other fine hotels, and generally, you're looking here at a picture right at the end of Prohibition. The staff was selected from the ranks of other fine hotels, generally from larger cities. The chief clerk, who was in charge of the front desk, was George Wolfe, who had been the chief clerk at the LaSalle Hotel in Chicago. And he was assisted by 2 gentlemen who had worked at the front desk of other large hotels in Chicago. Oscar Neustadt was the steward of the hotel. A hotel steward oversees the supplies and equipment of the hotel. Florence McCaleb was the housekeeper and in charge of all the maids. She had previously done that at a Chicago hotel. The cashier was Miss Miller, who had been the cashier for the Congress Hotel in Chicago. Miss Eva Lambert was in charge of the telephone exchange, and she had previously done that at a Springfield hotel. The Dance brothers were in charge of the barber shop, and Mr. M.L. Harry of the streetcar company was the first customer to be shaved at the new hotel. The newspaper noted that Fred Dance used a new razor to do the shave. Thank God he didn't use an old one. In the lobby was a cigar and newsstand, which was run by Oscar Neustadt. This was a well-run hotel, and you can see that from the staff picked by Harry Van Orman. There were 2 major entrances, one on South Main Street and the other on East Wood Street. Those of you who remember the Hotel Orlando from the 50s and 60s will remember those 2 entrances. There was a parking garage across Wood Street, which was torn down in the late 30s for the building of the Macon County Courthouse. Yes, there was a parking garage where the Macon County Courthouse still stands today. There was a beautiful and quite large lobby on the main floor with a large front desk. Off to the right was the news and cigar stand. Off to the left was a small desk where a person could place a phone call to the rooms upstairs. I presently have that telephone desk in my home. Further off the main lobby was the Commodore room, which was a dining room and bar. To the front of the lobby and to the side of the front entrance was an office, which became the office of Bennett and Shade Insurance, and the Bennett and Shade office was there for many years. The Commodore room, which was a dining room and bar off the lobby, as I say, was said by more than one visitor to be where serious drinking occurred. It seated more than 75 people. In the center of the Commodore room and against the wall was what was known as the captain's table. It is a large round table that seated about 10 people. I can remember growing up that my dad would occasionally take me there to join other attorneys who sat at the captain's table, and they ate lunch and shared stories from the courthouse. To each side of the captain's table were small 2-person tables, and it seemed to me that each time that I would be there with my dad, another lawyer named Lewis Mason would be there having lunch by himself at one of the smaller tables. Every day in the mid-60s, when Louis Mason was there having lunch, the maitre d', who was named St. Lawrence Tucker, would come into the Commodore room and he would loudly announce, "Telephone call for attorney Lewis Mason." It turns out that this was the first occasion of advertising by an attorney in Decatur. And we know that because one day Louis Mason was having his lunch when Mr. Tucker passed by his table. Mr. Mason said, "Hey, Tucker, you didn't announce my phone call today." And Tucker said, "Mr. Mason, you didn't give me $1 today." In the 40s, there were notable events at the Hotel Orlando. And on June the 4th, 1947, the actor Clark Gable had dinner there at the Hotel Orlando with his friend and fellow actor Al Minesco. The hotel was sold out and they stayed elsewhere, but they had dinner at the hotel. In the Commodore room, where Clark Gable had a 1.5-inch sirloin steak, he was on his way back to Beverly Hills after having attended the Indianapolis car race in Indianapolis. October the 18th, 1948, the Illinois State Republicans held a large meeting at the Hotel Orlando, attended by the governor, who was Dwight Green at the time. There was a torchlight parade of 314 cars, plus floats and trucks that ended up at the hotel, and over 5,000 people lined the parade route. The governor gave a speech in the ballroom of the hotel after dinner, and he was introduced by Decatur attorney Ralph Monroe. October 14th, 1949, the Illinois Press Association held its annual dinner at the Hotel Orlando rather than Chicago, where they had on all previous occasions, and the speaker that night was the president of the University of Illinois. October 28, 1949, the A.E. Staley Company held a dinner for its executives and to honor the visit by dignitaries from Belgium to acknowledge that Staley's had agreed to export crude soybean oil to Belgium, which was significant because it was the first American export of soybean oil to Belgium after years of only receiving it from China. December the 1st, 1949, the movie star Charles Laughton and his agent spent the night at the Hotel Orlando, and they enjoyed their dinner that evening in the Commodore room. October the 23rd, 1952, the Illinois Democratic Party held their state dinner at the Hotel Orlando, and it was attended by over 400 party loyalists, including state officers, United States representatives, the director of the state fair, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general. The state treasurer, Paul Powell, who was later to become the Secretary of State and to have shoeboxes of money discovered, spoke that night. And he attacked the GOP gubernatorial candidate, William G. Stratton, who he said spent $85,000 of state tax money on his Secretary of State campaign in 1943. The people who had dinner that night were served shrimp cocktail, prime rib of beef, frozen peas, which is my favorite, potatoes, salad rolls, and pumpkin pie topped by whipped cream. In the 70s, things started to change for the Hotel Orlando. Now, at the beginning of the 70s, the hotel was owned by Jack Powers. Jack was the grandson of Orlando Powers. And Jack had assumed the management of the hotel on January the 1st, 1946, and he continued as the manager until the Boss organization took it over in 1957. Powers continued to live in the hotel, and then he became manager again in the early 60s, which he continued until he sold the hotel in 1973. Jack Powers is a notable person for other reasons as well. He was, first of all, Jack Powers had proposed to the city of Decatur that the city of Decatur allow him to put underground parking place for guests of the Hotel Orlando underneath the streets and sidewalks of Decatur. Jack Powers was something of a civic leader, and he also is noted to have been on a board over at the University of Illinois in the 20s, going all the way back to the 20s, when they built the Memorial Stadium. And when they built the Memorial Stadium, they were having difficulty getting significant donors. And so at Jack's suggestion, the board voted to approve that anyone who made a certain donation, and I don't know what the amount was, for $100 more, they could have a lifetime guarantee to have seats at the University of Illinois football games. And it was noted by the newspaper that some people used those seats for as long as 50 years. And again, the cost was $100. Jack sold the hotel to Archie Crimmins in 1973, and Crimmins sold it again 3 years later to Harold Gilman. At that point, many of the hotel rooms were being rented as apartments, and it was losing its appeal as a hotel. And Gilman had considered taking floors and changing them over to commercial offices. There was a year in 1977 or 1978 when Robbie McGrath was operating a bar on the second floor in what used to be the ballroom of the hotel. This is before he opened the restaurant Robbie's, which is presently on Merchant Street. In 1980, the hotel was closed as a hotel. May the 29th, 1980, the final meals were served in the coffee shop, and the restaurant was closed that day, no longer serving food. An auction was held in July 1980 where the contents of the hotel were sold. And that's when I bought my telephone desk for the great price of $10. A group known as the Capital Associates, with Fred Loeb as a partner, Fred having grown up in Decatur, took over the Hotel Orlando building in 1980. And in the summer of 1980, the Illinois Housing Development Board approved an 8.5 mortgage commitment for the hotel and the Southern Hills Apartments as a dual project, both of them being renovated, the hotel being renovated to be converted into senior citizen housing, which it remains today. There are presently 87 senior citizen apartments at what we know as the Hotel Orlando. So the Hotel Orlando has quite the history. It goes all the way back to 1916. And the Powers family, fortunately, chose to build the hotel. That I would note that the hotel cost just barely over $300,000 back in 1916 to build. Does anybody have any questions? My thanks to Becky for assisting us in putting this event on, and my thanks to Melissa, my assistant. As always, she does such a great job putting together a PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you very much, Gary.
You're welcome.
It was
You're
very
welcome.
interesting.
Thank you. By the way, I should mention that Jack Powers, you can see the old Hotel Orlando, I'm sorry, the Motel Orlando. In 1953, Jack Powers built the Motel Orlando down in South Shores, and it stood there, and I can't remember the year that it was taken down. Maybe one of these pictures will tell us. But Jack, it was kind of a project of his. When he wasn't managing the Hotel Orlando, he wanted to have something under his control, and that was the Motel Orlando.